Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. This presentation is about the great U.S. election heist and some of the main players involved. First, I would like to introduce a man named Peter Neffenger, chairman of Smartmatic Corporation. I believe that he is the CIA-cultivated, squeaky clean frontman in charge of making Smartmatic seem normal, harmless, and domestic. According to Wiki, Peter V. Neffenger was born in 1955 and is a United States Coast Guard admiral and public servant who served as administrator of the Transportation Security Administration from July 2015 to January 20th, 2017. Neffenger was a vice admiral in the United States Coast Guard, serving as vice commandant of the United States Coast Guard since May 20th, 2014. He previously had served as Deputy Commandant for Operations, Deputy National Incident Commander for the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill, if you remember, Director of Coast Guard Strategic Management and Doctrine, Commander of the 9th Coast Guard District, Commander of Coast Guard Sector Los Angeles and Long Beach, and Captain of the Port and Federal Maritime Security Coordinator, along with the Budget Officer of the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Liaison Officer to the territory of American Samoa. Dear listeners, his position seems quite dry, but when you understand these positions, things make a little bit more sense. Being in charge of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill is an opportunity to provide cover for the globalists in the big energy sector. The positions on the West Coast, like in LA and Long Beach, are very important areas due to the ports. These ports take in billions worth of goods each year, most coming from China. We know of the Long Beach port and others being leased to the Communist Chinese, and Mr. Neffenger was in a position to oversee these shipments of goods to these ports. This would allow Mr. Neffenger to provide cover, as in the case of overseeing the Deep Horizon spill, to any number of operations that the Chinese planned on implementing with regard to these ports. An example would be to smuggle illegal goods or most likely human trafficking through these ports. He's an Obama loyalist, a Dem donor, and now is on the fake President-elect Joe Biden's transition team. On April 28, 2015, he was nominated by President Barack Obama to be the administrator of the Transportation Security Administration. On June 23, 2015, Vice Admiral Neffenger was confirmed by the Senate to be the next administrator of the Transportation Security Administration. This put Neffenger in charge of airport security in America. Again, a perfect position for someone to provide cover for any nefarious actors who may be into smuggling, whether drugs, guns, or people. Currently, since leaving TSA, Neffenger has become a distinguished fellow at both the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Center for Resilience and Northeastern University's Global Resilience Institute. And dear listeners, please look into the Atlantic Council. This is George Soros. This is the Ukraine Purple Revolution crew. This is the Russian oligarch crew, the NATO money launderers, the Eastern European human traffickers, folks. A huge group of mystery school scumbag cultists. As of 2014, Pete Neffenger is listed as the chairman of Smartmatic. Now, this puts him owning this company 1 full year prior to taking a job with the Department of Homeland Security at TSA. And the reason I say as of 2014 is because of this graphic from the internet. It's giving us the 2014 revenue, so I assume this was made in 2014. In 1997, 3 engineers, Antonio Mujica, Alfredo Jose Anzola, and Roger Piñate, began collaborating in a group while working at Pana Group Corp. In Caracas, Venezuela. Following the 2000 United States presidential election and its hanging Chad controversy in Florida, which seems to me to have been coordinated by both campaigns as being one big CIA Hegelian dialectic operation, to show how unreliable this outdated way of voting was, and thus to roll out this new way of doing things. Of course, created and controlled by the CIA, the group behind it all. The three proposed to dedicate a system toward electoral functions. Smartmatic was officially incorporated on the 11th of April in 2000 in Delaware by Alfredo Jose Anzola. Smartmatic then established its headquarters in Boca Raton, Florida, with 7 employees. And here's their articles of incorporation. After receiving funds from private investors, the company then began to expand. Smartmatic was a little-known firm with no experience in voting technology before it was chosen by the Venezuelan authorities to replace the country's elections machinery ahead of a contentious referendum that confirmed Hugo Chavez as president in August of 2004. Before the election, Smartmatic was part of a consortium that included a software company partly owned by a Venezuelan government agency. In March 2005, with a windfall of some $120 million from its first 3 contracts with Venezuela, Smartmatic then bought the much larger and more established SEOUOIA voting systems, which by 2006 had voting equipment installed in 17 states and the District of Columbia. On November 8, 2007, Smartmatic announced that it was divesting ownership of the voting machine company SEOUOIA Voting Systems. In 2014, Smartmatic CEO Antonio Mujica and British Lord Mallach Brown announced the launching of the SGO Corporation Limited, a holding company based in London whose primary asset is the election technology and voting machine manufacturer. Lord Mallach Brown became chairman of the board of directors of SGO since its foundation, while Antonio Mujica remained as CEO of the new venture. They were joined on SEO's board by Sir Nigel Knowles, many of you know him, global CEO of DLA Piper, entrepreneur David Giampaolo, and Roger Pignate, Smartmatic's coup and co-founder. And if you don't know about Lord Mallach Brown, please do a little research from proper sources. He is your direct connection to a man named George Soros, and in fact, George just appointed Mr. Brown last week to head up George's Open Society Foundations. So Brown is now in control of at least $20 billion in Soros funds. And actually, go check out an Aussie patriot on Twitter called N1 Nasty One, found at @1 NAASTY. He's a good dude and a good follow. And I'll leave a link to his handle and a thread that he did on Lord Mallach Brown for you guys to check out. The aim of SGO, according to its CEO, was to continue to make investments in its core business, election technology. But it is also set to roll out a series of new ventures, and listen up here, folks, based on biometrics, online identity verification, internet voting and citizen participation, e-governance, and pollution control. Now reread those 6 ventures and then pull up a search on the Chinese Safe Cities project and what Huawei is involved in over there. I'm going out on a limb here and saying that I believe Smartmatic was to be involved with the implementation of this tyrannical idea here in America. You know, as the Great Reset is being ushered in upon us. The company was contracted in 2004 for the automation of electoral processes in Venezuela. Since 2004, its election technology has been used in local and national elections in Africa, Argentina, Belgium, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Italy, Mexico, the Philippines, Singapore, the UK, the US, and of course Venezuela. And folks, Wiki won't connect the dots for you, but I will. Upon digging on each of these initial 13 country contracts, I see that about half of them were dumpster fires and had many glitches and errors occurring. In fact, the very first one in Venezuela. Following the 2004 Venezuela recall election, Smartmatic acquired SEOUOIA Voting Systems, as stated earlier, one of the leading U.S. companies in automated vote products, from the British company De La Rue in 2005. Following this acquisition, U.S. Representative Carol B. Maloney requested an investigation to determine whether the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, SEOUOIA, you know, the body that approved Hussein's sale of 20% of U.S. uranium to Russia. She wanted to see if they had followed correct processes to greenlight the sale of SEOUOIA to Smartmatic, which was described as having, quote, possible ties to the Venezuelan government, end quote. The request was made after a March 2006 hearing following issues in Chicago and Cook County, where a percentage of the machines involved were manufactured by SEOUOIA, and SEOUOIA provided technical assistance, ladies and gentlemen, some by a number of Venezuelan nationals who were flown in for the event. According to SEOUOIA, the tabulation problems were due to human error, as a post-election check identified only 3 mechanical problems in 100 machines. And remember that, 3 out of 100, that were checked while election officials blamed poor training. Other issues were suspected to be related to software errors linked to the voting system's central computer. Are you all naive enough to believe that? It's time that we stop taking these people's words for things. 3% is a huge number with regard to a national election. Here's a tweet from the president, Donald Trump, on December 2nd. It reads, in Arizona, it turns out that 3% of the votes cast in the 100-count vote sampling were tainted or worse. This would be, if carried forward, approximately 90,000 votes more than we would need to win the state. Now, we were granted a much larger sample to work with. Wow. Now, I don't believe that this 3% is human error as claimed by Smartmatic staff. In fact, it seems to me that they are sticking with this 3% error default for a reason, folks. First, they make you think that 3% is very small and irrelevant. Then they get everyone used to accepting a 3% error as normal and simply a technicality. Once accepted, this 3% can be used to flip pretty much any election in the world, if targeted in the appropriate precincts, and we see the anomalies in certain precincts in the 2020 election. Following the request, Smartmatic and SEOUOIA submitted a request to be reviewed by the CFIUS while also denying links to the Venezuelan government. The company disclosed that it was owned primarily by Antonio Mujica, Alfredo Anzola, now dead, and Roger Piñate. Smartmatic subsequently sold SEOUOIA and later withdrew from Cook County in December 2006. And folks, those 3 original owners, I believe, are CIA. I think you'll find the same if you dig on them yourselves. The Wall Street Journal wrote that Smartmatic scrapped a simple corporate structure of being based in Boca Raton for a far more complex arrangement of being located in multiple locations following the SEOUOIA incident. And it's the oldest trick in the book, folks. It's part of the scam. The spider web of entities, all diluted with layer upon layer of parent companies, etc. CIA Shell Company 101. Sheep no more, ladies and gentlemen. Though Smartmatic has made differing statements saying that they were either American or Dutch-based, the United States Department of State stated that its Venezuelan owners remain hidden, this is a quote, remain hidden behind a web of holding companies in the Netherlands and Barbados. The New York Times states that, quote, the role of the young Venezuelan engineers who founded Smartmatic has become less visible, and that its organization is, quote, an elaborate web of offshore companies and foreign trusts. While BBC News states that though Smartmatic says the company was founded in the United States, its roots are firmly anchored in Venezuela. Multiple sources simply state that Smartmatic is a Venezuelan company. And dear listeners, Smartmatic maintains that the holding companies in multiple countries are used for tax efficiency. And I don't think that's it, folks. And listen to this, ladies and gentlemen, and see if it sounds familiar. After the presidential recall referendum of 2004 in Venezuela, some controversy was raised about the use of electronic voting in that country. Studies following the 2004 Venezuela recall election found that Smartmatic's network was bi-directional, with data being able to be transferred both ways between Smartmatic devices and the telecommunications company CAN-TV. Now, this is what happened last month in the U.S. with signed affidavits with eyewitnesses citing that they saw PCs communicating via internet, a very explicit violation of election law. Other independent election monitors in Venezuela claimed fraud and submitted appeals and statistical evaluations, including peer-reviewed articles in 2006 and a special section of 6 peer-reviewed articles in 2011. They concluded that it was likely that electronic election fraud had been committed. The analysis of communication patterns allowed for the hypothesis that the data in the machines could have been changed remotely, while another of the articles suggested that the outcome could have been altered from about 60% against the sitting president to 58% for the sitting president. So a scam, and it looks like it's the same scam used here in the U.S. in 2020 at least. Smartmatic ran a 2010 Canadian election in Ontario, in Brooke Township, that was rife with discrepancies. According to the, quote, Goldie affidavit, a sworn statement on irregularities of this election by Herbert Goldie and Douglas Jones, an Iowa College professor and physicist who was able to examine this election and their equipment and procedures used. A big issue with this election, according to Jones, was that there was 12% disqualification rate due to voters not properly filling out the vote fields, or the small circles next to the chosen candidates' names. The problems arise in how many voters do not fill in the circles totally, and in many cases they only put an X or a check mark. The reason I bring this up is because they've expanded on this part of their scam. Referencing Ron Watson, or Code Monkey Z on Twitter, a computer genius who used to work for 8chan but now is working on something called Project Odin. He brings up this issue, and according to Ron's tweet on December 3rd, Dominion or Smartmatic has a plan for this. He says, move a candidate's oval on software by a few pixels. Then, during scanning phase, that race shows up as abnormal, causing the ballot to be sent to digital education for activist IT professionals to spoil batches unsupervised. What Ron is saying here is that this still happens 10 years later, and the resolution offered by Smartmatic is to kick those improperly filled ballots, which in 2010 in Canada was about 12% of the vote, to a Dominion employee for them to process by hand without any oversight. And not just that ballot, but the whole batch. That is to say that, as Ron says, an activist or a radicalized leftist due to too much MSM could be empowered by having no oversight to think that they are saving the country by thus altering these ballots. Or in a more nefarious scenario, think Eric Coomer in his conference call to Antifa. Not only is what Ron describing a bad idea, but it is also illegal. Neffinger's partners, the founders of Smartmatic, are Antonio Mujica and Alfredo Jose Anzola. Smartmatic was officially incorporated on April 11, 2000 in Delaware by Alfredo Jose Anzola. Smartmatic was then a fledgling technology startup. As mentioned earlier, its registered address was the Boca Raton, Florida, home of the father of one of the 2 young Venezuelan engineers who were its principal officers, Antonio Mujica and Alfredo Anzola. And it had a one-room office with a single secretary. Smartmatic was a little-known firm with no experience in voting technology before it was chosen by the Venezuelan authorities to replace the country's election machinery ahead of the contentious referendum that confirmed Hugo Chavez as president in August of 2004. And it's very interesting how these kids can come out of nowhere and get a national contract to conduct vote tabulation for an entire country. Is this person who was in charge of hiring the same person who was in charge of hiring Hunter Biden at Burisma? Because Smartmatic had the same amount of experience counting votes that Hunter Biden had in the energy sector, and they were somehow contracted to conduct a national election. And here's an interesting tidbit on one of those founders, Jose Anzola. Any idea, folks, how many plane crashes are accidents and how many are on purpose? On Monday, April 28, 2008, about 14:25 Universal Coordinated Time, a Piper PA 31-310 was destroyed during impact with residences shortly after takeoff from Aeropuerto International Airport in Bolivar. The certified airline transport pilot, 2 passengers, and 5 people on the ground were fatally injured. The flight was destined for Hato Airport in Caraco. According to preliminary information from the investigators, the pilot reported a loss of engine power after takeoff and attempted to return to the departure airport. During the return, the airplane impacted several buildings in a residential area, and a post-crash fire ensued. On board the plane were pilot Mario Jose Donati, a convicted drug trafficker in the U.S. and Venezuela; Smartmatic employee Eduardo Ramirez, a lawyer and a consultant for the firm; and Alfredo Jose Anzola, a partner of the company. Carolina Carucci recalled that a Smartmatic shareholders meeting was to be held that day in Caraco, where the company was registered. As there were no direct flights that morning, the plane had been hired by the Smartmatic company to make a charter flight to Caraco. Well, this sounds like quite a motley crew. A multinationally convicted drug dealer flying the plane? How does a guy like that even have a license to fly? And one other thing, the sentence there that says Smartmatic shareholders meeting was to be held that day in Caraco, where the company was registered. Where the company was registered? But according to the Smartmatic wiki page, this company was registered in Delaware with a Florida address. But here in 2008, it claims the company is registered in Caracas, Venezuela. Somebody's wiki sniffers aren't doing their job, ladies and gentlemen. Was this plane crash an accident? Did somebody on that plane know too much about something? Was someone on that plane no longer, quote unquote, down with the plan? Did someone on that plane want this company to remain above board and not engage in future fraudulent behavior? Your guess is as good as mine, but it seems as though this incident allowed for a management change. At some point after this incident, we see Neffinger enter the scene. Was he designated as Anzola's replacement to put a seemingly American patriot from the military branch of the Coast Guard in as owner in order to allow for less eyes on them when they begin to lobby for control of full U.S. elections nationwide? I mean, without Neffinger, many Americans would look at this company, its Venezuelan socialist founders, its apparent registry in Caracas, and would say, no way. This is just another layer of deception, dear listeners, as usual. Maybe we'll break up this presentation into multiple parts. I think that we need to do a dive on Mallach Brown and maybe even Eric Coomer and the Chinese connection to Dominion, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like, share, and subscribe, and please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching.